Shall we begin?
Welcome to the Happy Monster Cast. I'm your host, Scott Marchand Davis of Happy Monster Press.
Let's begin now.
This week on the Happy Monster Cast, we leave the world of Rifts and enter the world of Legion of Liberty, superheroes of 1776. The heroes of SET Alpha 1-2 have finished their mission to save the world, and that means some changes in the podcast. Starting next episode, we'll be transitioning to a campaign of Happy Monster Press's own Legion of Liberty, superheroes of 1776. In addition to this transition, we're also changing platforms. The Roll20 gang is now the Foundry gang, using the Foundry virtual tabletop. So far, the players love the interface and I love the ease of use, and the one-time cost versus subscription. Legion of Liberty is an alternate history in which some humans and a few animals in the Western Hemisphere are born with superpowers. As a result, the exploitation of the Americas by European powers included conscription of anyone found with these powers into special units in the French, British, Portuguese, and Spanish armies, fighting wars both in Europe and abroad. This conscription, along with other actions by the British Crown and Parliament, such as tea taxes and the Stamp Act, is one of the sparks that ignites a spirit of revolution in Britain's North American colonies, leading to the Revolutionary War. Each player has created a character who will play a part in the soon-to-begin American Revolution. Frankie is the team leader, Elijah Allen, a Virginian veteran of the French and Indian Wars with a taste for gospel and a silver tongue, but no apparent superpowers of his own. Bob plays Victoria Spellman, a tough, capable, and not at all ladylike Bostonian with the ability to create and throw vials of liquid explosives and an affinity for machinery of all sorts. Brendan is Artemis Crow, a shadowy figure who has been on the run from British conscription in Georgia for several years, and uses powers of invisibility and tracking in combination with lethal psionic bolts and spinning daggers to take down enemies before they know he's there. Jung Soo plays Clara Washington, a free black woman who escaped slavery in Virginia using her ability to boost her own physical skills and strength, and now fights for freedom with her trademark wooden shield. And Frank plays Pet Noet, a Massachusetts Wampanoag fighter who can transform into a monstrous creature formed of swamp muck and who occasionally explodes, wreaking havoc all around. And now, courtesy of Manuel, Sambs, and Veiled Fury Entertainment, here's an interview conducted during the Legion of Liberty Kickstarter last year, in which I talk superpowers, history, and role-playing. Enjoy!
Greetings, Patriot. General Washington really appreciates you signing up, and I know you are eager to find out how you and the special powers you can wield can influence the war. So, let's find out more. Hello and welcome to Veiled Fury Entertainment. I am once again for the second time joined by Scott Marchand Davis of Happy Monster Press. And today we are going to talk about his upcoming product, which is now on Kickstarter, Legions of Liberty, Superheroes of 1776. Hello, Scott, and thank you so much for joining me again. Glad to have you back.
Very happy to be back.
So for everyone who missed the first time you were on the show, just give us a quick rundown of who are you, what do you do when you don't design role-playing games, and how. And then we're just going to dive straight in how the Legions of Liberty came to be.
So I've been gaming since I was about, I think 10 was my first D&D Redbox experience, and migrated through multiple systems since then before really landing on Savage Worlds as a system that I love. It's easy for the GM to run. It's not hard to teach for the players, and I think it's fantastic. A couple years ago, decided to take some of the things that I'd been developing around the table and put them out as licensed products for Savage Worlds. The first one of those, which we talked about earlier, was Children of the Apocalypse, which is a post-apocalyptic fantasy set in a twisted future New England where gods are running around, magic works, general chaos ensues.
That's a great TLDR. General Chaos. I wonder if he's going to be an NPC in Legions of Liberty.
We do have some Tuckerizations where people can name the characters, and I think if someone really wanted a General Chaos, I'd probably include it.
Oh my god, I might have just given somebody a horrible idea. Well, so the Legions of Liberty. It's going to be the Revolutionary War, but with a slight twist. So I guess the usual question I ask at this point is what sparked that idea? But I can pretty much see where the idea come from, because superheroes are awesome, and that is the most important time in US American history. So mashing those together, that's really kind of a no-brainer. But what made you actually want to sit down and write it as a setting and not just run it for your group at home?
Oddly enough, there was a bit of local history involved. So I live in Salem, Massachusetts, which is mostly known for the witch trials, which also provokes a quite interesting Halloween season for us around here. But one of the less known things about Salem is that the Revolutionary War almost started here.
Oh, okay.
A couple of months before the official kickoff at the battles of Lexington and Concord, there was an expedition by British regulars coming up from Boston attempting to confiscate cannon from the Salem militia. These were led by a gentleman named Colonel Leslie, and there was a almost absurd incident in which he insisted on crossing a drawbridge into North Salem, and the colonial militia refused to have him cross over. Had that gone differently, hostilities could very easily have ensued. One person was actually wounded in the altercation. But eventually, the local parish priest negotiated a compromise where Leslie was allowed to march across the bridge 40 rods into North Salem and then had to turn around and go back to Boston. This is known locally as Leslie's Retreat. But it really was almost the start of the Revolutionary War. And it's nobody knows about it unless they're local.
Wow.
So I thought that would be a fun way to kick off the Revolutionary War, was with that battle going differently. Mm-hmm. This time, the colonists put up more of a fight. Leslie is more intransigent, and that's the first battle of the Revolution.
Wow. So this is going to be a very interesting talk we're going to have, because I know very little about the American Revolution besides what's been portrayed in popular media. So, of course, I've seen The Patriot, and since I'm a subscriber to the History Buffs YouTube channel, big shout out. Those guys are amazing. Well, he is amazing. It's a one-man show. So I know that The Patriot is actually very far away from portraying the actual events of the American Revolution. So I know that I don't really know much about it. So that's going to be interesting. So that already brings me to my first question here. So how much of the Legions of Liberty is going to be an actual depiction of historic events, and how much of it is going to be a liberal reinterpretation to get your campaign to where you want it to be?
There's actually some of both. So there are a couple of decisions that we made up front when designing the setting. One was we wanted to stay fairly close to history up to the point of the Revolution. So there's not a lot of difference between the way history played out in the world, despite there being superheroes running around, up until the point of the Revolution. But we also wanted the players' actions to really matter during the actual campaign. So there are places where history can diverge based on whether the players win or lose a particular battle. That will then lead them down a different path that could potentially result in things like the Americans owning Canada at the end of the war.
No, I know some Canadians who are not going to be happy with that aspect of the campaign. Hi, Gary. Okay, so since now it's already been kind of brought up, it's the players are all going to be superheroes, superpowered individuals. I mean, hero is an ambivalent term, depending on which side you're standing on. So I guess we should probably call them superpowered people. So the interesting point is only people born in the Americas have a chance to become a superpowered person. So that means every superpowered person on the side of the British is also going to be someone who was actually born in the Americas. So
that's right.
There could be a lot of, tension, social conflicts, because people are basically, as it probably happened in the Revolutionary War, people are going to go to war against people who used to be their neighbors, maybe even part of their families, if I'm not mistaking that.
That absolutely did happen. As a case in point, one of Benjamin Franklin's sons remained on the Loyalist side, and I don't know if he actually fought for the British or not, but he certainly remained on that side and ended up migrating to England after the war. So that was very, very common. So you do have that dynamic, and depending on how much the players want to and the GM want to emphasize role play versus straight up superhero brawling, there's a lot of potential for those kinds of conflicts to play out. Potentially, you could even have, say, a sibling who was in the British Greycoats, which are the shorthand for the Royal Superhuman Regiment, and you might end up fighting that person who is a close relation.
Wow, yeah, that's always an interesting point for more social encounters. I can see that being used by GMs just for that exact reason. If you want to give your campaign that more personal touch, then it's going to be like, yeah, you're going to go on a night raid mission and just burn the whole place down. And when they're there, they'll just be like, Frank, what are you doing here? What's that uniform on you? And yeah, that's going to be very interesting at the table. Talking about the making of the outfits of both sides. So the role of women in the Revolutionary War are, that part is well documented. Also, the part where lots of women said, "Screw you, we're going to fight anyways and do our own thing."
Exactly.
So how is that going to work in Legions of Liberty?
Well, to start, half of the Greycoats and half of the Legion of Liberty, the unit that eventually was on the colonial side, in fact, women, because half of the superhumans born are women. So in that sense, there's a certain amount of gender neutrality when it comes to those units. They have female officers, they have female non-commissioned officers. Women are right in the front lines. With that said, it's a very tiny population. And I took some inspiration here from something I'm going to plug, which is Naomi Novik's Temeraire series. This is also a genre mashup. It's the Napoleonic War, but with dragons. And certain breeds of dragons will only accept female captains. The captain being someone that has kind of bonded with the dragon, and they have the term in English is impressing, where if you have a hatched bird, they kind of fixate on whoever they see first as their mother. Dragons work a little bit the same way. So since these very powerful dragons will only accept female captains, they have to have some female officers in the aerial corps. But that hasn't changed the overall social structure that much. So historically, it's not that different. With that said, there's nothing in the system that prescribes you going a different direction with it. So a player or a GM could absolutely play a more socially liberal version than was actually present in history, or you could stick closer to the historical background, depending on how you want that to play out at the table.
And of course, since we are already changing history in that way, that there are superpowered humans, and of course, half of them born are going to be women. That is going to change things in the world if it had played out that way. So,
yep.
The whole idea for people to treat women equally as men would be introduced a lot sooner by force, by the sheer necessity of, we're not going to deny 50% of our main fighting force here.
Exactly. And in fact, several of the key NPCs, particularly on the British side, are women. So there will definitely be women facing the players across the table when it comes to some of these super battles.
So, another big influence in the fighting and in making up the fighting force are Native Americans. Anything special on that regard?
So a couple of interesting things there. Obviously, Native Americans would have had superhumans all along. But part of the way the setting is created is that the superhumans are not extremely powerful. It's not like a single superhuman is going to be able to take on an entire company of British infantry and come out in one piece. So that's one of the reasons why history hasn't changed all that much. You don't have a Superman or a Captain Marvel level superhero running around who could just decimate the entire British army. They're more lower powered superheroes who can influence a battle, but they're not going to dominate it.
Yeah.
So for that reason, that's why the standard history of the conquest of the Americas by the European colonists played out more or less the same. It's also important to remember that in many cases, some of those Native American tribes sided with the conquerors. Cortez would never have been able to conquer the Aztecs had not some of the Aztec client states sided with him because they were sick of the Aztec emperor running their business. So there's definitely, and that played out in American history as well, where you had Native American tribes on both sides of the revolution. The majority sided with the British, and there are some savage tales in the setting that actually take that into account, where you're either doing things like trying to sabotage the flow of arms to those tribes who are fighting against the revolutionary colonists, or you're trying to use diplomacy to persuade some of those tribes to side with the colonists and against the British, and therefore some of their fellow Native Americans.
Cool. Right, so there's one thing that is also in the Jumpstart we just mentioned, which I noticed because I watched Sleepy Hollow, or I've watched Sleepy Hollow until they removed the female lead character and the whole series went really weird. That was the famous expression, "the British are coming," which it wouldn't have been, and I actually I double checked that actually on Wikipedia, and it says that's a common misrepresentation of what he actually said, because back then many people were still considering themselves British, but maybe not royally loyalists, something like that.
Loyalist is the usual term. Yeah. So yes, we that was a tough editorial decision because it is so iconic, but it really wasn't what he said. He said the regulars are coming because it was the regular British army versus the militia. That's really how the early conflicts in Massachusetts played out. You had the regular army, mostly from Britain, although they had some colonists in those units. And then you had the militia, which was entirely composed of the local colonists, less organized, more democratic. They had some cases where they were electing officers, similar to what happened later in the Civil War, which, compared to buying your commission, which was the standard practice in the Royal Army at the time, not sure which of those was the better approach. Is it the more popular guy who should be in charge or the richer guy who should be in charge? Kind of a wash there, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, we absolutely made the decision to stick with that iconic phrase, "the British are coming," but in the course of the Plot Point campaign, I tried to kind of shift the language a little bit, where it started out as being more about the regulars and then eventually became more about the patriots and loyalists and then the colonists and the British. It's a tough thing to convey, though, because it really is very iconic in the U.S. that the British are coming is what Revere was yelling on his ride, or in our case, because he is a super speedster on his run to Salem to warn the militia.
Yeah. Which actually touches on the introductory adventure in the Jumpstart. So you guys should actually absolutely check out the Jumpstart, except if you're watching this when the campaign has already concluded and you can buy the whole book. So just do that then.
Even better.
Well, so superpowered humans, which means arcane background superpowers, and I'm just basing this on what I've read in the Jumpstart. So in the Jumpstart, you are basing it on the old Savage Worlds deluxe version of the arcane background superpowers.
Correct.
So that was a deliberate decision then.
Yes. When the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition came out and we saw the arcane background gifted, we really had to think about, do we want to migrate over to that or stick with what we have? And the power level was the deciding factor there. Mm-hmm. In order to get a new power as a superhuman, you have to buy the new power edge and you have to buy the skills. in our setting versus simply buying the new power and already having the skill, which is how the Arcane Background Gifted works. So we actually wanted to make the power curve flatter, make it harder for superheroes to become more powerful with experience, because we thought that fit the setting better. So this way, it's more expensive in terms of spending advances to build up a power or to gain new ones versus simply taking a new power edge and suddenly you might have a D10 and 2 entirely new powers.
Mm-hmm. So they'd need but they still would get 2 new powers with the edge. They just then have to buy 2 more sets of skill.
Right. So they start out unskilled with those new powers, which could be interesting. Mm-hmm. And it's even more so because we also use the no PowerPoint setting rule. So whatever PowerPoint cost those powers have, that becomes a penalty on that skill roll as well. So you might be rolling a D4 minus 6 for a particularly good power until you get some skill in it.
That's going to be very interesting, but yeah, still better than somebody who doesn't have access to those powers. Well, there might be a chance for him to pull it off, and also with the no PowerPoints option, you can just concentrate. Let me see if I can recite the rule correctly. You can concentrate for a round to negate, I think, up to 2 points of penalties. So
correct.
Still in the realm of possibility, even if it's a very high PowerPoint cost of power. And you modified character creation a bit to, I guess, give them a bit of a head start and not have them spend all their precious skill points, of which there are fewer anyways, since it's now the Adventure Edition on the skills they need to actually be a superpowered being.
Correct. I wanted to give the superhumans a bit of a leg up, so they have some extra points for attributes in case what you're really going for is someone with super strength, for example. Mm-hmm. You have more attribute points to jack that strength up to a D10 or a D12, and also extra skill points that are specifically intended only for the superpower skills. So if you just take one power and you want to stick with that one power, you can start with a D12 in it essentially for free. And I did have one character in the playtest campaign who did precisely that. And she started out with shape change. Mm-hmm. So that made for some really interesting shape changes in the campaign, one of which we're going to depict with our trademark Sharpie and art. And that is when she changed into the form of a giant crab and attacked a British vessel during a naval action. So basically, she kind of crawled up over the side of the thing, causing quite a morale penalty for that particular mass battle.
I can imagine that. Yep. That's going to be marked on some maps. Yeah, there are actually monsters here. Just avoid area at all costs.
Yep. But if you take new power, then you can spread those points around a bit more. You have more flexibility. We also added some new edges that help offset some of these penalties. For example, you can have power focus, which gives you a bonus on your power roll that helps offset the cost of the no PowerPoint rule penalties.
Yep, and besides that, there is also something you call reflexive power. So how did you get the idea for that?
Well, when I started putting the setting together, what I did was go actually look up as many superheroes as I possibly could and say, do I have what I need to build that superhero? So if I want to go build the Human Torch, do I have everything I need in powers and edges to build that superhero? And the one that came up pretty quickly was Wolverine. So Wolverine automatically regenerates. The problem with that in Savage Worlds is if he gets hit really hard and is incapacitated, he has no ability to heal. So you need something that allows you to trigger your ability based on something else happening. So he gets injured, he automatically kicks in his healing power. But you could do that in a lot of other things. Someone shoots you, you automatically throw up deflection. Or if you want to go Incredible Hulk, you get really angry, you automatically get boost trait, and your strength goes up with a trapping of turning green. So it's so it seemed like that and a few other things that we added in were really needed in order to be able to model as wide a range of superpowers and superhumans as possible.
So those don't count as an action since it's a reflex. The player just rolls for it, but it's not an action to do it.
Exactly. You obviously can't get the benefit of that concentration ability that you mentioned earlier because you're doing it spontaneously, but it doesn't add to any multi-action penalties, and it can happen, as is kind of obvious in the healing example, when it's not your turn.
Cool. That will probably open up. Yeah, that's going to open up the door for some very interesting character builds you couldn't do without delving into the actual Superpowers companion, which hasn't yet been updated to. So was the non-availability of the Superpowers companion, was that a deciding factor for the way you then modeled it after the old Savage Worlds Deluxe Superpowers and went with the whole reflexive power edge?
It actually had more to do with the way the Superpowers companion is structured. So to take a step back, this setting has been in the works for about a year and a half. And so long before Savage Worlds Adventure Edition was really on the horizon and we had an idea of what that was going to look like, I was putting the rule set together for this game. And so the decision not to use a Superpowers companion happened very early on in that process. And it was a combination of a couple of things. One was, again, that idea of having it be very low power. One was to make it easier for players to get in, because if you don't need the Superpowers companion to run the game, that's one less thing to buy, one less thing to worry about referring to, one less thing to learn. And the last one was that a lot of the Superpowers companion seemed to assume a modern or more than modern level of technology, where you have things like super sorcerers, but you also have a lot of things where you have railguns and armor suits and things like that fit perfectly for a modern or close to modern superhero setting, but don't really fit in a black powder world. So you're looking at the two options at that time. I said, for what we're trying to do, core works fine. We don't really need the Superpowers companion. We just need to add some more powers and some more edges to give people more options so they can really create the superhuman that they want to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that, especially with the modifiers for the powers that I need in the Superpowers companion. Would probably be too easy to just design a super powered Gatling gun, for example, and nothing like that existed in the Revolutionary War. Not even remotely close. I think that was way later than in. With North and South going at each other.
Yeah. Even then, I think the Gatling gun per se really came into play later than that, more like the 1880s or so, if I remember right. There are a lot of other things in the Superpowers companion that didn't really fit. For example, having a power ring or a staff or something like that. When the setting really assumes that superpowers are inborn, there's a lot of things that you'd have to take out of the Superpowers companion. And my preference as a designer is always put more in rather than take things out.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes for a lot less headaches. I can relate to that. Well, you in the Jumpstart there are going to be some new powers. A few of them are listed in the Jumpstart. The powers you had in there, they are still at a base duration of 3. Is that a leftover from back when the whole process started? You started putting things together.
It is, and the jury's out on whether we're going to change that. For Legion of Liberty itself, it really doesn't matter, because with no PowerPoints, base duration is more or less irrelevant.
Sure. But people might look at the powers and be like, that's actually a cool thing. I would like to incorporate that into my game. And then there'd be this discrepancy between the core powers of Suede and the powers you introduce in Legions of Liberty.
Right. And we're leaning towards probably updating them at this point. The one catch is that some of these powers are very, very powerful and have a correspondingly high PowerPoint cost. So I might need to do a little bit of playtesting just in a completely arbitrary setting to make sure that giving them that longer duration doesn't actually render them completely absurd at the table. But I'm leaning towards probably updating them, because that definitely is a carryover from Deluxe.
Okay, so new power. What made you want to introduce new powers and not just go with the existing ones and just slap some very heavy trappings on them?
There were some things that there wasn't really a solid power that would resemble it. In some cases, it's borderline, but a good example of one that really isn't is Mimic. Mimic is a classic superhero trope where you can copy someone else's power. There really isn't a good way of modeling that in core. So the Mimic power, that one really had to be new. An example of one where I could have probably trapped it is Elemental Mastery. Elemental Manipulation is a cool power, but it doesn't do a whole lot. if you want to do something like a water bender, you can't really do that effectively with elemental manipulation. You could layer on a whole bunch of powers and say, okay, I have telekinesis and I have entangle because I can freeze. That seemed almost too costly for someone who just said, hey, I want to be able to, cause water to raise up out in the ground and smack my opponents with it or freeze them in ice. So more for simplicity of character creation than anything else, certain powers made sense to just make it one power versus 3 or 4 powers that were all trapped the same way.
Yep. Feeling that. Okay, so well, we've touched on it a bit, but yeah, all the player characters are going to be essentially America's born superpowered beings. So what's are they all planned to be, how do I phrase this? Is it assumed that they're going to be fighting for the militia or then the regular army once that is established, or is there a way for them to just be kind of a rogue group of agents working for the Patriots?
So the core plot point campaign definitely assumes that they are that they're working as part of a larger organization, which eventually becomes the Continental Army. With that said, there's absolutely nothing that keeps you from having them running around as a rogue group of agents. And in fact, you don't even necessarily have to be superhuman. I took a page from Rifts and said, if you want to play someone who is not a superhuman, start them out as a seasoned character. Give them some legs up on the superhumans so they can keep up. And I think that actually works really well in this setting because the superhumans aren't overly powerful. So you drop a seasoned character in who maybe is an expert marksman, they're going to be able to contribute nearly as well as a superhuman in a combat situation. Similarly, you drop a socially focused seasoned character in, they're probably better than the superhumans in most social situations, unless they've taken powers like mind wipe and implant memory, which one of my playtesters did and had a lot of fun with.
The eternal bane of the GM, mind control powers.
Oh yeah, or players too. Rifts in particular, where you have people running around in battle armor and mechs, Puppet becomes a very, very useful tool in the GM toolbox.
That is true.
With that said, the core plot point campaign does assume you're fighting your way through the Revolutionary War, mostly because I wanted to give people the opportunity to be in some of those iconic battles, to fight at Bunker Hill, to fight at Yorktown, to be present at the Continental Congress signing the Declaration of Independence. It really gives people that feel of being in history. But there's also an adventure generator, which is really focused on kind of black ops or covert operations in the Revolutionary War. So if you wanted to run more of a rogue squad of superhumans running around doing their own thing, the adventure generator works really well for that. Here's a mission, go execute it.
Cool. So we already know Paul Revere is actually a superhuman. So who else is in there who people might know that is not what he was in actual history?
He's actually the only one. And I did that on purpose. Even Paul Revere was a debate, but I just could not resist the idea of him being a super speedster and running his way out to warn everyone. But everyone else is a normal human. So Washington, Hamilton, Franklin, and on the British side, Howe and Cornwallis, all normal humans. The thought was superhumans are so rare and precious that it would be really unusual for one of them not to be in the gray coats already. It is a conscription situation. It's not optional. The only way to get out of it is to buy your way out, which is how Revere is not a member of the Royal Superhuman Regiment. So for any significant fraction of the founding fathers or the key figures on the British to be superhumans just didn't seem to fit right. And it also makes the players that much more important. If Washington is striding along the battlefield 40 feet tall, blasting people with lightning bolts, it's kind of less impressive for the players to be doing their own thing on the battlefield. But if he's just an ordinary guy who happens to be really good at tactics and command, you start to become really pivotal to what's happening on the battlefield.
Yeah, especially if you're powerful enough to actually shift the tide of a battle, and you are the people that Washington is relying on to actually go out and do that.
So, exactly.
Very,
Exactly.
very good way of framing and shifting focus away from important historical figures. Yeah, I like that a lot. So they can just play out that inner child of them that would be going up to Washington and be like, "It's really you," and in the next moment they'd be like charging into battle for exactly him.
Yep. Or alternatively, we had one player at the table who was playing a Native American character and really wasn't his biggest fan.
Yeah.
Her perspective was, okay, I'm not a big fan of these colonists. The British are worse, so I'm going to help them deal with the British. And at the end of the campaign, she basically said, okay, now I'm going to go found the insurgency that's going to throw the rest of these guys out as well.
Oh yeah, I can see a lot of interesting turns developing that way. Especially once you're going to write up the follow-up book from the Secession Wars. Did I say that out loud?
Actually, we were thinking more the Napoleonic Wars would be fun because several people have said, hey, can I play a graycoat? And well, you can, but we could make it a lot more fun by actually putting them in the spotlight by having them fighting through the peninsula against the French superhuman forces, most of whom would be a lot more experienced because they were coming in from Canada back when it was still owned by the French.
So, just another example off the top of your head of a very, very big historical moment that's going to be changed in your plot point campaign. Some teasers, so to speak.
So, a really iconic image from the Revolution is Washington crossing the Delaware, and that is a moment that happens in the game. And it's a different situation if that battle goes the wrong way. So the way that can play out in the plot point campaign is if that battle goes badly, Washington could actually be captured by the British, in which case the next thing that the heroes are going to be tasked with is go rescue Washington. So obviously completely different than anything that happened in history, but really provides a fun opportunity for the characters to go behind enemy lines in kind of commando mode and do a prison break off, in this case, a prison ship off the coast of New York City. I played that one out at a convention recently, and it was a complete chaotic blast. We had people's powers or plans getting completely crosswired. We had a shape-shifting character who rolled a critical failure and got stuck as a human inside a jail cell that she had infiltrated as a mouse. It was just absolute chaos and craziness, but everyone around the table had a blast with it.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, hopefully if that ever happens, you have one or two people with water superpowers, because damn, you're going to need it.
We actually did have a couple people who had the state shift power. This is another new power in the setting that allows you to change from your normal human body into stone or water or vapor or something like that. So being able to change into water was very, very handy for that one in terms of sneaking up on the ship because you were just part of the ocean.
Yep, that is one heck of a bonus to your stealth roll.
Yeah. The gentleman with the disguise power, on the other hand, simply converted himself into a colonel of Marines and boarded the ship in the complete open, demanding that they bring Washington to him at once. And thanks to a very high persuasion roll, that worked out very nicely for him.
So that's interesting. A single colonel just showing up out of nowhere, and then everybody being like, okay, what do we do?
Well, he wasn't the only one. A couple of the other party actually went in disguised as redcoats as well.
Okay.
And we got to roll in another fun historical figure here, one of the less known ones, a guy by the name of Hercules Mulligan, which will be familiar to people who like the musical Hamilton, but probably not otherwise. Mulligan was a Patriot agent in New York City who ran a haberdasher that catered to the British officer corps. So he was able to collect a ton of interesting information and then funnel it to Washington via Washington's Culper ring, which was the infamous spy ring that he ran for most of the war. The Culper ring also included at least one, probably more than one woman, which is another way to bring women back into the picture in the Revolution. notably the Agent 355, who was never identified historically. There are some good guesses as to who she was, but she was a really key element of that ring in terms of collecting and extracting information to feed to Washington over the course of the revolution.
Well, are there going to be links to all the Wikipedia things I'm going to have to read up to actually understand what's going to happen in that campaign?
We are planning to have both pretty extensive bibliography and also have historical notes scattered through it, talking about things like this is what really happened versus what's actually happening, and why did we choose this particular path for the alternate history if things went differently. Case in point, the invasion of Canada plotline happens if the Battle of Bunker Hill is won, rather than lost as it was historically. That would force the British to evacuate sooner, which would give the Americans an opportunity to move on Canada sooner than they were able to historically, because it freed up their forces from the siege of Boston. So if they win the battle, then Canada becomes in play sooner. If they lose the battle, that's what happened historically, and so things proceed down more of the standard historical path.
Nice. So, is there a way for them to completely lose in the plot point campaign?
There is not, although I wouldn't object if a GM decided to play it out that way. And that's really because once you get France in play and the war extends into Europe, and that was probably inevitable given the relations between France and Britain at the time, then the conclusion of the war was pretty much foregone at that point. The Americans were going to win. If they were going to lose, it would have happened a lot sooner in the war, and in which case you'd have a very short campaign, which didn't seem like a whole lot of fun.
That I can absolutely understand, yeah. Okay, so I think that just covers about everything I was able to dig up. I'm sure people with a more profound knowledge of the Continental War would have a ton of more questions to ask, but that is not my forte of history. Sadly, I think when I finally get that book, I'm going to be spending a lot of time on Wikipedia, and that's actually a very nice thing about Legions of Liberty. So because I can just go on Wikipedia, I can just read through the whole course of the war and all things that happened in big places and in small places, and mine that for ideas. And then, as you said, there's an adventure generator, and use that, feed in some real things that happen, and bam, I have more than enough to fill out the void between the plot points.
Absolutely. And then if you want to get a head start at that, we did blog the entire playtest campaign at the HappyMonsterPress.com blog site. And I did include a lot of the Wikipedia links. So when I'm talking about someone like General Ho, you can jump immediately to him. And in honor of the Kickstarter, we actually collected all of the blog posts into a single blog post, so you can just grab each link and read your way through the campaign and see how when the giant crab attack happened, and what has got to be one of the best characters that any player has ever come up with at my table, Jacoby Barnes, the Boston Lobster Man, and his adventures shifting into armor form with his lobster carapace and wielding his mighty lobster claws in melee combat.
Yep, can't wait to read up on that. So yeah, thank you for collecting that. That's going to be interesting. So, well, everything Scott talked about, you're going to find links to that in the description below this video. There's going to be links to the Kickstarter, or in case the campaign is already ended, there are going to be links to the, I assume, Drive-Thru RPG site where you can buy the finished product. I'm going to include links to the Happy Monster Press blog. And yeah, Scott, anything else you want to plug at this point? Any shout outs?
So I actually would like to give a shout out to the entire Savage Worlds Aces community, the licensed publishers. They are a fantastic community. They've been a huge help to somebody coming in relatively new to the process. Got some great feedback on the Kickstarter page that was really helpful. And so far, the Kickstarter is going extremely well. So thank you for that feedback. I am quite sure it helped.
That's going to be making a lot of people happy. Yeah, the Kickstarter is going amazingly well. It's at this point you're almost funded. As of this moment when we're recording this video, you are just about $200 short of being funded, and there are 20 more days in this campaign. So there's going to be a lot of lovely art, and I already know what your artist of choice is capable of from Children of the Apocalypse. So very much looking forward to seeing the finished product there. So, Scott, thank you for once again joining me. It's been a pleasure, just like last time, and I'm sure next time will be just as equal.
All right. Great to be here, and looking forward to the next round.
And thank every one of you for watching whenever that may be. You know where to find me. You know where to find all the stuff. And so then when you click the links, you will know where to find Scott. And until then, I'm going to see you in the next one. And until then, stay savage. Bye-bye.
All right.
You can follow Happy Monster Press on Facebook as Happy Monster Press, at our website, HappyMonsterPress.com, Twitter as Happy Monster PRS, or follow the podcast on YouTube, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, iTunes, or Google Play Music. The Happy Monster Cast is part of the Savage Worlds Media Network. This game references the Savage Worlds game system available from Pinnacle Entertainment Group at www.peginc.com. It is unofficial media content permitted under the Media Network Content Agreement. This content is not managed, approved, or endorsed by Pinnacle Entertainment Group. Certain portions of the materials used are the intellectual property of Pinnacle, and all rights are reserved. Savage Worlds, all related settings and unique characters, locations, and characters' logos and trademarks are copyrights of Pinnacle Entertainment Group. All other content is the intellectual property of Happy Monster Press. Background music is Ice Cold by Jason Shaw.
Oh, for sure.